MacBook Pro versus the iPad Pro. Is the iPad Pro overrated? Why would I buy a MacBook if I could just buy an iPad Pro with a keyboard? Why would I buy an iPad Pro with a keyboard if I can just buy a MacBook Pro? What's the difference between the two? Do I need either of them? Why do people even buy Apple? It's overrated. Well, I'm here to answer a few of those questions as a beginner. Don't think that you're going to get this wild information, because this is coming from a beginner. And here's my comparison on the iPad Pro and the MacBook Pro. So let's start with the iPad Pro. So let's start with applications. The App Store. You use a computer for software and you use an iPad for applications. You can't really get a lot of everything on their software, don't get me wrong, but they're referred to as applications. And one thing that is for sure is that the App Store is more for the iPad Pro than it is the MacBook Pro, obviously, because you're not going to download the Creative Cloud off of the App Store on the MacBook. You're going to get it from adobe.com. But on the it's just because of the fact that the iPad's more mobile and it's like more of a mobile software. The mobile software is going to work a lot better on it. That's just like common sense, in all honesty. So apps like Netflix, Hulu, those work better in my opinion on the iPad, because on the iPad you could easily open the app and watch your movie, watch your show. But on the MacBook, you genuinely have to go on Netflix.com, or you could download a third-party app that kind of brings them all together, which that could work. And shout out to those companies who put in the effort to make those applications come to life. But I don't want to have to do that. I want to be able to download Netflix, download Hulu, and watch it on my computer. But okay, I guess I can go on the website. But on the iPad Pro, it's just as simple as tapping it, logging in, and it never logs you out. I just feel like those applications are better suited for the iPad, and they work better on the iPad. So let's talk about for the creatives, the people who like to use the iPad Pro. Remind you, I'm talking about the iPad Pro and the MacBook Pro. Pro. Why? Because that's what I use. I don't use the Air. Ew. Why would I do that? If I'm using the Air, I'm not a creator. I like to use stuff for like note taking and bare minimum stuff. The iPad Pro's Photoshop and Lightroom are a lot easier to understand and a lot easier to use because they have less tools. You don't have to know as much, and in all honesty, I feel like it's better for beginners. As a beginner, I would say that I learned more from the Lightroom on the iPad than the computer, just because it's less tools, it's less of a hassle. I can get the job done close to the same way, but you really can't dive deep into the Photoshop like you can on a computer. But if you're a beginner, you don't need to do that anyways. So just get familiar with the tools that you can use, and then when you're ready and you really gotta take that next step, get your computer and get Photoshop on there, and you'll be able to take that next step. Which I honestly think eventually you'll be able to use Photoshop on the iPad the same way you use it on the MacBook or the computer, because Photoshop seems like it's like one of the apps from Adobe that integrated very well with the iPad Pro or the iPad in general. The bended screen, I don't really know what the technological terms are for it, but the iPad has a bended screen. When it comes down to the Apple Pencil and the iPad, they go hand in hand, obviously. The first generation didn't have the ability to get heavier, and I'm going to have a little doodle like right here. Fuck that, I have a green screen, bitch. Throw it back there. As you can see right here, the Apple Pencil, when we trace this line, it's nice and thin. But when we put pressure on it, it gets thicker. It's very pressure sensitive, meaning like, when you use it like a pen or a marker, you lightly use it, it won't be as dark. But if you fucking that bitch, it's going to be dark. It's trying to replicate that. But in all honesty, I feel like it's doing a better... Drawing on an iPad might be one of the easiest things to do in life. It's like you don't need a sketch pad, you don't need an external source. You don't have to draw like this and then look up. You can just draw. That's one of the things I think the iPad is great at, is with Procreate or Adobe Illustrator. No, not Illustrator. Is it Adobe Illustrator? No, it's not. Affinity Pro. The Affinity app. They did a great job at creating another app where you could draw on. It's just Procreate was a lot cheaper for me, so I used that, and I used it for my thumbnails. But if you're an artist who likes to draw, paint, all that stuff, any type of drawing, even spray painting, like how people tag the walls and stuff, that type of stuff, you can do that all on the iPad. And it's basically one big digital piece of paper that has a lot of memory. And if you strictly use it for that, you'll be good. And you could use the iPad Air for that, but you won't get that bended screen. The iPad Pro, personally, I think it's for creators, people who like to create things and get artistic. The iPad Air and the MacBook Air, to me personally, is for people who like to use it for Netflix and YouTube and their schoolwork, stuff like that. It's not getting its full use in the iPad Air. Well, the iPad Pro, a creator could really do a lot with it. And in all honesty, we grew up on phones. In this age, if you're 10 and younger, you grew up in the phone world. You're gonna have a phone by the time you're at least 12 if your family has the finances for it. A lot of people have to wait a lot later, but phones are getting a lot cheaper. Hand-me-downs are happening, so it's easier for them to get phones in their hands. Meaning it's easier for kids to understand how phones work. Meaning they're used to a mobile software, and when they're used to a mobile software, the iPad Pro is perfect because it's a mobile software with it has some computer functionalities in it, I guess, like the files app, multitasking. It's good at what it does, but it's mobile at the end of the day. It's more suited for people who are used to the mobile stuff. So it's easier to get used to because we're used to using phones. It's just a big phone at the end of the day. You can't call people on it, but you can FaceTime and message them. It's just not a phone. But you can still get cellular data on it and use it, and you use internet all over the place, but it's just not a phone. But it does everything a phone can do. It's just not a phone. And it has a keyboard on it though, but it's not a computer either. It's an iPad. You see, we can't sit here and compare it to things that it's not. Why hasn't Apple made get the iPad and put it on the MacBook? Why haven't they done that like Microsoft has? Well, either they're money, or they're very greedy, or they're just waiting on it. Because in all honesty, that seems like a great idea. Give us a touchscreen. They gave us a touch bar, but they didn't give us a touchscreen. Why? In all honesty, I don't know. Would it make my life easier if I could bend my MacBook backwards, like the flipbook on the Microsoft flipbook? You could literally flip the screen, draw on that bad boy, flip it right back over, and get to typing. But because of the fact that I'm a sucker for Apple, I'm not gonna buy that. I'm just gonna buy an iPad Pro and a MacBook Pro. Call me dumb. It wasn't the smartest investment, not gonna lie. Because if I got familiar with the flipbook and I'm looking back at it and seeing how dumb of a mistake I might have made. But the iPad Pro was a gift, so it was kind of like it wasn't in my Anyway, personally, I believe that if you get those two, combine them, you get the flipbook. So if you want that, go to Microsoft. Apple's just not doing it for some reason. I think that they just want to keep this trend going until the trend dies, because it won't make sense. But you can't deny one thing about Apple: their Retina display. And my favorite part about the iPad is the multitasking. You can watch a freaking 3-hour fucking 4K movie on Netflix, and you could edit a video on the right side. You can multitask, and it's very easy to multitask. It doesn't slow down at all. In fact, when you edit videos on there, the rendering speed doesn't get impacted one bit like it would on a computer, especially when it's a big ass file, like a 42 gigabyte video. You're editing it zoom, like it'll slow down every now and then, but compared to a MacBook, a computer, it doesn't slow down that. Like, the difference is insane. So that's one thing that the iPad is known for. It's a lot easier to use. It's a lot easier to get used to. So like, it doesn't get slowed down when it multitasks, meaning when you push it, it doesn't slow down. The only thing that really slows down the iPad is when it gets overheated, when it gets hot. Either you're using it too much or you're just in a very hot place. You need to let it cool down. Let it cool down. Okay, so we got done talking about the iPad, so let's talk about the MacBook. This one's going to be a lot shorter because I'm still getting used to my MacBook. But for somebody who's just getting used to their MacBook, one of the first things I noticed was, well, not really noticed, more, I finally got my baby back. I just gotta take a moment. I've been waiting on this day, man, because After Effects, I missed you. I'm sorry, it's been so long. I've been working with you on 8 gigabytes of RAM. Bitch, now I got 30 fucking 2. Anyway, it really looked like I was crying. That's the crazy part. Anyway, After Effects, Adobe. You could use every single Adobe app that they have. I hate calling softwares for like software apps for computers. I hate calling them apps, but at the end of the day, every application on the Creative Cloud is applicable on the computer. So that's what makes things a lot easier as well. And when you have a computer and you use it to the best of your abilities, you're going to get really great content. You're going to get really great results, because at the end of the day, it does for creators. It does that. It helps you create a lot easier, only when you know how to use it, though. Because a lot of the things that I do now, I could do on my iPad, and I'm gonna get the same result because I'm so new at this. I don't know how to use it the right way. But when I do, for like people who make music, they're gonna look. They could make music on GarageBand, yeah, but they're gonna feel like bums. As opposed to making music on a MacBook, they're gonna feel like, okay, this is something that I could work with because it's very versatile. That's one thing that's very important about these type of things, is how versatile a computer actually is. So the MacBook has it beat right there because of the fact that it's just a computer. And when you spec out that computer like I did, 32 gigabytes of RAM and a terabyte of memory, even though I could probably did 2 terabytes, but you feel me. So also, it could hold a lot more storage, the MacBook. You could get an external hard drive for both, but at the end of the day, this thing could hold about like a lot of terabytes of memory. I don't think they've came out with an iPad that could hold a terabyte of memory yet, which they might down the line. I just haven't seen it yet, and if they did, it'd probably be very expensive. My favorite aesthetic. More USB-C ports. I have 4 of them, not 1. Usual MacBooks have 2. I got 4. Makes my life a lot easier. And I can get a USB hub. I already have a couple that I use for the iPad, and I guess MacBook's just gonna force me to use a lot more of them. But I'm just gonna try to get one big one that I could do with like HDMI, not SSD, but SD cards, Ethernet, because I like to run fast internet, not Wi-Fi. So I could get an Ethernet cable and just straight plug that bad boy in. Be able to get another display, which is something that I cannot wait to do, because one of my fellow video editors keeps telling me how important another monitor is. Just not there yet. I'm very new, and I still got a lot to learn. So I basically nailed everything that I could for the MacBook. What I use the MacBook for, I use Premiere Pro, Adobe Illustrator, and Adobe After Effects, Adobe Audition. All those things are just for videos that I make for YouTube. After Effects is something that I really want to get good at, so that when people need good effects, they could come to me. That's where I can make some money off of. My Illustrator, I'm only using that to create my logo, so that I can say I created it. And Premiere Pro, obviously, that's where all the video edits go down. And shit, I'm still so new to it. It's insane. It is insane. Everything that I've learned from LumaFusion, I'm already like past that with Premiere Pro, if that makes sense. Like, here's all the stuff you can learn in LumaFusion. All that stuff is like not even close to the amount of stuff that you have to learn from Premiere Pro. But that's what happens with the MacBook and the iPad. Is I'll get to that later. But for now, basically, when you think about it, the computer, when you're a creator, you have everything you need. With the iPad, it's restricted. Let's use a producer. If he's gonna choose what's he gonna choose, an iPad or a MacBook? He's gonna choose a MacBook because he could produce off of a MacBook. He can't do that off of an iPad. But for somebody who draws, they're not gonna choose a MacBook because they can't draw on a MacBook. They're gonna choose an iPad because they can draw on it. So let me talk about the similarities first before I give you advice on what you should choose. So for both of them, the first thing that I noticed, it's easy to manage files. It's almost the same process. As one's more touch integrated, the other one's for a mouse or a touchpad. And it's just easy to manage files. It's easy to edit. You can edit 4K videos on both the iPad and the MacBook. It's just a lot more harder on the MacBook because there's so much more to learn. There's so much more things you can do. And when you're new to it, it's a lot harder. But when you get used to it, it becomes a lot more dynamic. And it becomes a lot better. In all honesty, your content's going to be a lot better on a computer. But you can edit videos, 4K videos, on both the iPad Pro and the MacBook Pro. And then you have drawing. You can draw on the MacBook, don't get me wrong, but it really depends on what you draw, in all honesty. Because you can get a little, what do they call a fucking sketch pad for the MacBook, but my opinion, you're spending the amount of money on a touchpad as you would be spending on the keyboard for the iPad Pro. So if you draw, get the iPad Pro, but you could do it on both. It's just which one are you more used to. Note taking is something, oh my god, I don't even want to talk about how many notes I have altogether. I just write down everything that comes to my brain, because if I don't, I'm going to be mad at myself later. So note taking, both of them, and then external audio recording. I use the same method for the iPad as I do for the MacBook. I grab this, connect it to I would do it right now, but it would fuck up the voice memo. I connect it to my little USB hub, smack that into the MacBook or the iPad, get the same type of quality each time. And then photo editing. When photo editing isn't really, Photoshop. When I think of photo editing, there's different ways to edit photos. You could literally break down a photo and turn it into something completely different and call that an art piece, or you really just messing with the levels, you're messing with the colors, you're trying to make it more vibrant, less saturated, or you're trying to give it some more clarity, dehaze it. All that's Lightroom. And in all honesty, I could get better results out of my iPad than my MacBook because I'm more used to my Lightroom on the iPad. But you could do both on them. You could photo editing in general. In all honesty, I feel like that's the best thing to do. That's the best thing on both of them. It's easy to do. It's not easy, but you can get a professional look from the iPad and the MacBook. So now let's talk about what you should get. Remind you, the iPad was released in 2010. The MacBook was released in 2006. But the Macintosh, Apple's computer systems were all the way back in 84. So of course they're gonna put their all into a MacBook. And it's going to be it makes more sense just because it's more trusted at this point. But for creators, let's think about what type of creator you are. Do you draw? Do you sing? Do you write? Do you edit videos? Are you a colorist? What do you do? So whatever it is you do, you got to think about which one fits your needs the most. For an iPad, I would suggest that, in all honesty, for people who draw and sketch and paint, all that good stuff, that's what I would suggest for them, is an iPad Pro, because you could do so much with that stuff. And you could turn all your files into PNG, JPEG, all the good stuff. The iPad Pro in my opinion, would be the best bet for somebody who draws, paints, all that good stuff. Video editing, if you don't want to take it professionally, and if you just want to snip, get it out the way, snip, get it out the way, and just edit your videos on a fast pace, and you don't need the best software, the iPad. But if you want to chase it as a career and you want to do it as a profession, MacBook. The iPad Pro, it could get you your creative dreams, but down the line, when you get really good at what you do, yeah, you'll be used to the iPad, but eventually I feel like you'd be limiting yourself because of how much more you could do on a computer than you could just do on an iPad in general. But that doesn't go for every single creator. That's mainly for video editors, in all honesty. Filmmakers. The iPad Pro, yeah, it could get you. It could do some things, but it can't get the job done the way a computer can. But if you draw, it's like vice versa. It's like the opposite. So if you want to get the iPad, you really have to ask yourself, what are you going to use it for? If you want to get the MacBook, you have to ask yourself, what are you going to use it for? If you're going to spend $1,000, make sure you spend that $1,000 on the right thing. Because once you do that, you'll be fine, and you'll feel very proud of the thing you got. That's what my purpose of this video is to help you find what you need to buy. Because once you find out what you can buy and what fits your needs the most, it'll be a lot easier. But having this big ass platform to just draw on, I feel like an artist looks at that and is just like, that makes my life a lot easier. Especially with all the brushes, it seems like it's for drawing, but I was using it for video editing and I felt restricted. You see what I'm saying? So for me, it felt like I was being restricted. I don't feel that same way with the MacBook. With the MacBook, I feel like I'm restricted, but it's my fault because I don't know how to freaking use these apps. I don't know how to use Premiere Pro to the best of my abilities. I don't know how to use After Effects to the best of my abilities. So it's hard. I'm restricted because I'm just so damn new. But I'm not an artist who draws, so I can't say that same thing about the iPad for people who draw. because I feel like they would be more restricted on on a MacBook because they have to use a mouse to draw, as opposed to a MacBook where on an iPad where you freehand that motherfucker. So, like I said, it's about how you use each device. And then, in all honesty, to wrap it all up, it comes down to: are you more familiar with a mobile device or a computing device? Which one are you a lot more familiar with? I grew up using computers, but the minute I got a phone, it was like I understood exactly what was in my hand. It was easier to get attached to. So getting the iPad was a lot easier to get attached to and get used to. So then when I bring myself back to a MacBook, something I've never owned a Mac, anything. I remember my cousin had one when we were younger, and I would look at that thing in awe and just be like, I didn't even know Apple made computers. And when I seen how just clean it looks, I loved the aesthetic. That's the thing I love about Apple the most, is their aesthetic. It's nice, clean. And that's what kind of drew me in for the MacBook. It's the aesthetic of it. And it's powerful. And it fits my needs. What happens when you learn to use both of them to the best of their abilities? Meaning, like, if you're an artist who draws, what if you know how to really, really get down and jiggy with the damn iPad? You draw on that, send all your files to your MacBook, and you get down and dirty with the video edits, and you are just creating great content. You won't need After Effects to make those. You'll be basically creating those effects from scratch, which is a lot more cooler because it's a lot more creative that way. But at the end of the day, it's what happens when you can learn how to use both. How creative can you get? So I have both, and in all honesty, I don't really know. Like, for this video, what could I do with the iPad? What could I bring in from the iPad that'll, help my thumbnail? That's the best thing that I could think of. So yeah, that's my video. MacBook Pro versus the iPad Pro. It's not which one's better, it's which one's more suitable for you. I'm out.